Hello, everybody. Um, so we're gonna wait a little while, and I'll be talking for a bit while we'll have people joining the stream. If you're joining in, wow, we got 20, 30, 40 people joining the stream here with FP. This is the Sanctum Governance Corner. That is not an official name. We just there's a lot of discussion right now about Cloud 2, and we've heard a lot of community feedback over the last few days on Discord, on the research forum, definitely on Twitter. And we thought that we'd take the opportunity to hear community members out, and also just to kind of see where we are. So, just having a group discussion. This might not be the biggest stream, but it certainly will be a serious and a substantive discussion about Sanctum governance. I've just flown into Hong Kong. I've been traveling all day. Got to my hotel room 2 hours ago. So yeah, definitely hopping around a bit. FP, you're still in Singapore, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's been it's Sunday, right? So we're still grinding on the weekend.
Yeah, it is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
I think kind of like on the meta level, we shouldn't think of sort of like working on Sanctum as a grind. Today is actually the 4-year anniversary of when I first started working on Sanctum. And I think for a long time I was just thinking, oh, I just got to grind this through, have to do what needs to be done. And then I realized that, look, I've been here for 4 years and I'm gonna be here for 4 years more, right? And the only way I can get through this, right, is if I don't think of it as something to get through, right? But rather every day, it being sort of joyful, right? It's like I'm excited to do this, right? I'm excited to learn about how we can do governance better, how we can sort of like accelerate the process to make better decisions quicker, right? And we're learning on the way. I think that is like the mindset as I come in, and not like, oh, I have to do this at 10 p.m. on a Sunday. But rather just like, okay, I'm glad to be given this opportunity to do so. So that's kind of like the mindset I'm trying to have. Yeah, and I think that's the thing that's going to keep me going for 4 more years. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Poor choice of words on my part. I apologize.
No, not
And
at all.
truly,
Not at all.
I mean, like you know this, but like I'm having a lot of fun. I'm actually probably screaming
Yeah.
too much in the chats, too much emojis, too much energy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I only have one mode, and that mode is go go go. Um, so I do realize that uh, uh, but hey, but you know what the thing is, like
Mm.
I've been saying this privately and publicly quite a
Yeah.
bit, but um, you guys make my job very easy. And what I mean by this is that there's always stuff to talk about, right? Like
Yeah.
substantive stuff.
Yeah.
And uh, I've been taking on more and more. I mean, I think I've been taking on more and more work, and it's truly a labor of love and joy.
Mm.
And Carlos, hi Carlos, how are you, man? It's good to see you. Squad's in the house. Congratulations to Carlos for all his success over at Squads. I heard that
Mm.
that is also a very cracked team. Like
Yeah.
you've heard
I love
some pretty good
squats.
chatter about the Squads team in the ecosystem, right?
I think it's yeah. Squats is incredible. I really, really, really like sick product. Still waiting for the Android app. When is it coming? Carlos, do you know?
He probably does know,
Yeah.
but just like
Yeah.
all of us builders, there's some things that are well, I'll contact you later. Carlos says, "Lol." So just give me a second, guys. We're just trying to gather more people on the stream. So I'm just gonna be posting a couple of links. If you give me maybe
Yeah.
30
Yeah.
seconds to
We're
one
gonna be
minute,
pretty chill
I'm just
about
gonna make
this, and yeah.
sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So just give us like 30 seconds to a minute. And I'll be posting some links, making sure that we get as much community participation as possible in
Sweet.
this discussion about Sanctum governance. FP, I have a horrible habit of putting you on the spot, but I'll talk very slow and tee this up for you very softly.
Sure.
I think a lot of people, so I was very fortunate yesterday
Mm.
to get in touch with two community members who I think have been through with us through thick and thin.
Yep.
I'm specifically calling out Frog Fwag Ross. I cannot get that right. Fwag
Yeah.
Ross, as well as Nucky. So I had the pleasure of having a one-on-two call with him yesterday, and it was completely out of the blue. He had been texting me and tweeting me since the morning, and then we moved that over to Telegram. And I said, "Hey, like if you're available, like I would love to hop on a call." And he's like, "Yeah, man, just give me like 15 minutes." So we hopped on the call, had like an hour-long discussion, and actually, that discussion was the impetus for this impromptu Sanctum Governance Corner named TBD. And it's probably not even. I mean, it really just depends on where we are with regards to the state of Sanctum governance and how the community is feeling about it. But I think the reason internally why we pushed for having this stream, just out of the blue, is because there's definitely a lot of discussion around Cloud 2.
Yeah.
And so like the question that I have for you, FP, it could be I'm going to ask you two questions, and you pick the one that you think is the most appropriate to cover. So the first kind of question I have
Yeah.
is like, what's the grander vision for Sanctum governance, and like, what's like a north star? Like disregard like the funtarchy mechanisms, disregard like
Sure.
exactly like how we could put up proposals up. But like kind of one question is like, what does Sanctum governance look like, and what does the
Yeah.
community have to look forward to? And the second question, and you might decide that this is the better place to start, is to have a discussion about what has been the community feedback so far around Cloud
Yeah.
2. What have you seen? What have you heard? And kind of like, what are your thoughts on what that means for some of the timelines that we've discussed? So, like, pick your poison. Either I think would be very valuable. I'm pretty certain that we're going to cover
Yeah.
both. But
Let's do
do want to
both,
give you
right?
the
Let's so
chance.
let's do kind of like I think again, sort of like something that really is special in Web3 is that we have this token, right? And this token is like it is like a very, very magical and special alignment mechanism. Um and we at crypto, like in Web3, we can really experiment with stuff that really, really isn't done sort of like anywhere else. And I think like sort of this kind of like public governance is one of them, right? It's like, here we are, making decisions about the protocol, about the treasury, about this and that, about, product decisions and so on. And like, I think like never in the sort of like history of anything, right? Is this being done? And I think that's like a wonderful opportunity for us to kind of like learn and experiment, right? I think in particular, what is super interesting to me, um, it's just kind of like thinking about getting Sanctum to a place where so the first question was like what's the grand vision, right? Really we're thinking about the DAO, right? Like and I mean this word has been just used, it's just been it's just completely sort of like been misused, or like but really that grand idea is good, right? Like we want to decentralize decision making, right? We want to decentralize Sanctum, right? Such that everyone who holds like the token is incentivized to sort of like contribute, and anyone can contribute, right? And like decisions are made and executed like without the core team ideally, right? That kind of like that has to be sort of like where we are going, and that's where I wanted to go, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that makes total sense. And I, well, I always like, you know me, I get a little obnoxious with this. I like to mix in a little fun with serious discussion. But I guess one community member asks, did FP get a haircut or what? And FP, you wanna answer that question real quick?
I finally cut my hair, so it's like it's short now. Yeah, I used to have long hair, but yeah, I
I mean, FP has always been handsome, but I think you look. I mean, it's a really great haircut, honestly.
shut up.
I know people are like, I, I mean, Carlos says, "What a bromance." I agree. It's one-sided though.
No, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, Eno has a wife, unfortunately. Otherwise, you know, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm kidding.
um,
She's not. Yeah,
s- so with regard to larger governance, and I think you brought up a really good point, which is, I think there's this sometimes this misconception, and this isn't even Sanctum specific. I think this is true for kind of mm, how many communities view projects and their attitudes towards governance. There's this kind of general feeling that projects want full control to make all the decisions. And you touched on this point, which is that like decentralization of the proposals for Sanctum is actually a very good thing, right? Um, and for multiple reasons. One reason that I'll give is definitely and you have preached this to this team over and over again internally, and you've also said it externally several times. But just to repeat for emphasis, um, that yes, we have ideas, but there are certainly people out there who have equally good ideas, if not better, right? And it's so much more powerful if you, and I'm trying to make this, desperately trying to make this term a thing, but I don't know if it'll actually catch on. But we're trying to cloud source ideas, right? And in an ideal world, we would have, a whole cohort, like an army of proposal writers who are putting up high quality proposals onto the research.sanctum.so. We'd have people putting up high quality proposals uh, in the Discord or at least commenting on them. We'd have people being able to give live feedback on Twitter that through some mechanism we're aggregating and paying attention to. These are all things that are steps to the decentralization of Sanctum governance. Um, and I think FP is having a sneeze attack. Hope you're okay
Yeah,
there, brother.
I have not been
Um,
sleeping so good, so I'm sort of like sneezing. So sorry, I apologize.
oh,
I'm a bit
this,
sniffly. Yeah,
yeah,
so
I feel equal. Yeah, I mean, I know that this is a labor of love, and that you truly find joy in this process. Um, but Meow actually had this one tweet where he said, the only downside of really loving what you do, is that you get no sleep. And I think that's you love this project. And by the way, I mean, I should have said this earlier, but it just kind of slipped my mind because we were talking about governance. Congratulations on this the fourth year of Sanctum. Does that include the original like Socian project as well?
yeah. I mean, so I mean, Socian was doing liquid staking, and this all started off with like a kind of single RFQ from Solana Foundation right back in February 2021. And I remember back in February 2021, it was basically just it was like Solana was looking for someone to build like dashboards for something called a stake pool, and the stake pool program wasn't even written yet. Yeah, so it was like it was a crazy. Yeah, I don't know. Like when I think about how much has changed and how far we've come, I just get like really, really like grateful and proud. Yeah. So yeah. And the
Yeah.
challenge now is 4 more years, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I really enjoyed on the last forecast. So, this was about, 4 or 5 days ago. Uh, you know, Soju saying that the first time that you guys ever met was at the first non-breakpoint hacker house that Solana ever had. And for whatever reason, Foundation decided that the first non-breakpoint hacker house was going to be in Singapore. Was that kind of would you count that as the start date, or did it start even before that? Like, tell the inside story there.
Even before, I think. Yeah, even before. I Yeah, before. Yeah. I don't think I knew Soju then, or like I think Soju was with Radium at that point. Um yeah, it's things like I mean I should write something about I always say I should write and then I never write. But like I yeah, it just it's like it's crazy because like like we've grown so much in 4 years and I just can't wait to figure out how to grow yet another 4 years. Yeah. I think that's gonna that's gonna be insane. And I think Solana is something like 8 years old today, right? So I think it started in 2017. Yeah. So if and 4 years ago it was FTX. So yeah, I think the growth is going to be exponential, and I think the founders are going to learn like I think I'm going to learn so much in the next 4 years.
Yeah. I mean, like we're all like this doesn't just apply to you as a human being. I think this really applies to governance systems in the aggregate as well, right? I think especially for crypto governance, there are some aspects of crypto governance where we're just discovering how normal corporate governance works and like why people already do things the way that they do them, right? Like there's some aspect of that, right? But even though that might be true for some aspects, like for example, some processes, it's better just to have a more centralized, and like I'm very careful to say this, but like truly, if you need to move fast for a particular process, it actually does make sense to have like a lead, right? And whether that person is picked in a decentralized manner or in a centralized manner is a matter for community discussion. But there are quite a few corporate processes that exist for a reason, and we've done it that way for hundreds of years for a reason. It works, right? It's efficient. Um, but that being said, there is this aspect of, what can we do differently from previous systems that would be more positive EV for the organization as a whole? And I think that just as much as people talk about, crypto governance being a meme, my counter argument is so is traditional corporate governance, right? This idea that your average shareholder is actually going to shareholder meetings or listening to quarterly calls or haven't delegated their shares to their broker who is going to like vote for them or whatever is kind of ridiculous, right? Like that's also a meme, corporate governance. There's most people who hold stocks are not actually participating in corporate governance, right? And that's a clear and present lost opportunity, I think, for traditional governance systems for major corporations that are regulated by, in the United States case, I believe the SEC.
And also,
Um,
I mean, the tech to do that maybe hasn't been built out at scale, right? Like, I think this sort
mhm,
of like
yeah,
this sort of like collaborative, like the tech is only just here. We have a StreamYard here. We've got Discord, Telegram, right? Like, these things can be done in real time, not in like annual shareholder meetings or whatever. I who the hell knows
yeah.
how that, I've never been to one in my life, obviously. Um, but it's like that, yeah, maybe the tech's finally here and people can vote on stuff and it's all on chain. It's like, yeah, I think we're on the precipice of something like that could be very, very meaningful. And we're just doing our little part to make sure that we explore sort of how that works.
And I think that's a super key term there is exploration, right? Um, the process by which we explore what sanctum governance looks like is not always going to be linear, right? There will be peaks and there will be valleys where we have honest and respectful disagreements, or different points of view. Even it might not even necessarily be a disagreement, just a different philosophical way of thinking about like what would be best for cloud, what would be best for uh, Sanctum as the company, what would be best for community. And the best part, like the most exciting part about this, and Prophet kind of hinted at this on forecast number 3, which is that this is the first time since Athens that we've truly tried to explore a new system of governance. I mean, we're talking thousands of years ago.
Yeah,
And
that
along
gets
the
me
way,
like
throughout
chills,
here,
man.
yeah,
That gives me chills. Sorry to
yeah,
interrupt, but it's like I just love that idea.
no,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and uh, many of you know and love FP's writing, and if you know him as a person, and I'm getting to know him better more and more, he really values doing things that are unique, but not for the sake of uniqueness itself, but because like in almost every aspect of life, whether it be governance or how you launch product or like what you decide to launch on the product roadmap, there's almost always this feeling of, well, this is the way it's always been done before, so that's the way we're going to do it. But there's a lot of missed opportunity there, right? And what I noticed from FP, just working with him more and more, is he's constantly searching for these lost opportunities, right? Like where's not only the sometimes it's not the lowest hanging fruit, maybe it's in the middle of the tree, but if we just reach a little bit farther, we can get a juicier orange. And so I think governance is also falls into that category where, like, yeah, sure, we could have done token voting. Like, it's much easier to explain. Fair enough. But Futarchy, done correctly, in our version of it, Funtarchy, is really this idea of like, how do we bring the most economic value to the token? Now, this is not a discussion about token price. That's more of a meta comment on what Futarchy and Funtarchy is designed to do, which is to take the best proposals, and how do we define best? We define best as in what would bring the most economic value to the project as a whole, right? So how do we take the best proposals, not only just from FP, who's a wonderful writer, but also other wonderful thinkers in the space, right? And bring those ideas to the top, right? Allow the cream to rise, and then put those up for votes. Like, how do we exactly come to this process? How do we do this exactly? And that is, it sounds deceptively simple. It's very deceptively simple. I mean,
Yeah,
but it's not
I will
actually.
say that it's a lot more complicated because sort of like one of the things that I wanted to sort of like address here is kind of like, well, you know, there is futarchy, which is that we vote on the proposals, whether or not to sort of like put them out, like, whether or not to implement them or not, right? But then there's also this whole like meta governance process, like who can put proposals up on the forum, right? Like, who like do, after proposals are discussed, like who gets to decide which proposals go up, onto vote and when and how and so on, right? And like all these things are things that we've got to figure out together, right? Because if it becomes like, if I don't want it so like, oh, like only the core team can raise proposals, and then like, then what's the point, right? Like, I mean, it's better than nothing, sure, right? But ideally, it's like a decentralized process where anyone can raise a proposal, we can discuss it, right? And then if enough people agree with it, we can put it up to a vote, right? And so on. But at the same time, we don't want all sorts of hundreds of proposals going up, and wasting people's time and so on. So it's like, yeah, that meta process is tricky. And what's the sort of line between sort of like discussion on the forums, like how much should that be binding and so on and so forth. People, like, there was feedback we say like, well, look, I mean, you put out this proposal, there's discussion, and then I change it how I like. It's like, that doesn't seem very like good. I was like, well, I mean, fair. I mean, but also like, what's the alternative? So, I mean, anyway, I'm not saying that we have the answers or what we're doing is perfect. It's obviously not. But like, we've got to, I hope that we can slowly iterate towards like an actual, like, actually good governance process. Yeah. So that's why we're here.
Yeah. Then, this is more of a personal note, and FP, I'd love to get your take on this. But I also think it's very important in the beginning of any serious endeavor, uh, to set the right expectations. You know, yes, hype is good. Yes, it's good to be positive and optimistic because being positive and optimistic is more positive EV than being negative and always trying to find what's wrong. Even though being critical is important. My point is that, like, what does it mean to experiment? Like, what does that actually look like in practice, right? I think a lot of people theoretically kind of might think to themselves like, oh, like that sounds okay. It's fine to experiment. But like when they're confronted with what that actually looks like, where there actually is a lot of let's say different opinions out there, right? And people do sincerely and earnestly disagree with each other, right? What that might look like is that we try a process, right? And we run it for, like, let's say a week or two or a month or 2 months. And we find out at the end of this process, and of course, you can't know in the beginning when you start an endeavor, like how it's going to go. Um, we might decide to reverse course, right? And why do I mention this? Because what I often see on the timeline is that when a project tries something and then it doesn't work out the way that they originally envisioned, or like they need to regroup and then kind of rediscuss like how exactly we're going to do this the proper way, it turns into FUD, and it really bothers me. That really bothers me, and so that's why I feel so passionate and quite forceful on this point, which is that people have to be okay with experimentation, because that's what it means when you try to, like, if we're saying, and if you believe in what we're saying, that we're exploring a new form of governance that's never been tried before, and like we're trying to rewrite or redo from scratch a form of governance that hasn't really been experimented. I mean, it has been experimented with for thousands of years and iterated on. So democracy has taken many, many forms. But my point being is, futarchy will be the same. It means that you will try things that don't work out. And that should not translate to FUD. It should be, failure shouldn't be celebrated. But I think that failure is a normal part of the process. And failure is not even the right word. I don't think it really can.
It's
Experimentation
failure is, yeah,
and
exactly. It's
yeah,
like iteration and like dead ends and like, well, I mean, look, I mean, if Futaki sort of like there is a real possibility that in like 3 months we're like, okay, Futaki is way too complicated, it doesn't fucking work. Like, like let's just sort of like go back to token voting. I want to stress that it is possible, right? Like, we could well decide to do that, and that wouldn't be a failure, right? It would just be like we tried something and it didn't work out, right? Like, and now we've learned that okay, like maybe we'll revisit it another time, right? And that's fine. Like that is like 100% fine. Like in fact, like that. I mean, probably shouldn't be celebrated, right? But it's like, yeah, I mean, like we went in, like the whole point of stuff, like we're gonna make this bet, we're gonna experiment. It means that like sometimes it doesn't work out, and we've learned something from the process, and we've learned like okay, it doesn't work out because X, Y, Z, right? And that's a good thing. Like we've got to, yeah, and then I it shouldn't, as you say, right, it shouldn't be fun. Which is like, oh well, you said you did this, and now you're doing something else. Well, like this is
But
part of the process,
so
right? Like yeah,
yeah, I think that we're allowed to be forceful in that point. However, there is going to be a certain expectation from the community from us. And I think that there are certain expectations that have been communicated to us, on the Discord, on the research forum, and on Twitter that are completely valid, right? So let's talk about what I think are some super valid points. Um,
yeah. Let's go.
over commun over communication, right? Like it's okay for us to change our minds, but first of all, starting from the beginning, no one on this team currently, I'm gonna say this probably like 10 times on the call now that this thought is in my head. No one on the team is like starting from the point of this might fail. Even though that we understand that as a theoretical logical possibility, like our current stance and where we stand with Funtarchy and where we stand with governance is we are pushing 1000% in this direction to make it work. That's I don't want anybody to like clip FP and be like, well, if it like don't do that, okay? Seriously, like we are 1000% committed to making Futarchy as a system work as of today with the information that we have, right? And I think that's a very reasonable ask from our side, right? Which is that please take our efforts in good faith and that we are actually trying to make this system work and that we're not there is no plan B for the time being. Now, with more information, with more data, with more community feedback, with more how did this actually turn out? What are the actual results for Sanctum and the token and the community, right? Then with more information, it might be very clear what the answer is, right? But that being said, the first point, very forcible point I want to make is that like we are 1000% going in this direction with the information that we have today, right? Um, so what should what should the community expect from us, right? I think the community should expect from us over communication, right? Like we are gonna hold your hand every step of the way. And, what I've been preaching to the team, and I know it can be a little obnoxious sometimes, I apologize for being so loud about it, is do things that don't scale with community, right? Like talking to your users and community like super users one on one when you have hundreds thousands of people who love you and like that's actually one thing that shocked me. Sorry, small aside, just joining this team is like I knew that Sanctum was loved. I didn't know it was this loved. It's like my Twitter is blowing up. It's like people are asking me to like talk to you, to tell you things. I am telling you those things, you are responding to those things in the chat. Like but those small moments when you do things that don't scale, it's like it's a really beautiful moment where like you're really connecting like the heart and soul of the community with the people who are at least on the protocol level pushing it, right? The community is also pushing it in different ways. um and so yeah, I think what the community can and should and has the right to expect is that even if we change course, it's like we will communicate that thoughtfully and we will communicate that thoroughly. And it might be disappointing to some people who want to see like a strict, because I think the has or like it's not a bad habit, but like what a lot of people expect from a project, especially since they want to be bullish, is just like token go up all the time, and that governance goes up all the time, and every proposal is passing, and every proposal is maximally productive, and that's just not. And I'm as bullish as I am on Sanctum, as bullish as I am on any project. It's like, no, that's not how life works. I'm sorry. That is not how progress works. It's like an experimentation that requires like earnest effort. And for us to, be okay with a level of we don't know what the future holds, but if we try earnestly and push in a particular way and try to get the juiciest orange we can by reaching as far as we can,
Have you heard
it's a
of
good
this
thing.
term? The term like pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. Have you heard of this term?
I'm definitely familiar with pessimism. No, optimism of the will, but
Right.
pessimism of the intellect, no, not so much. Go ahead.
So basically, it just kind of means like, well, sort of, I guess different people can have different interpretations of that, but the kind of like idea is that, the pessimism is like of the intellect means like we're well aware of all of these problems or all of the things that might fail about governance or about futarchy, about sanctum, or about anything in general, right? And you have like all of these sort of like, doubts and like, you're well aware of like all of these challenges and shortcomings. That's pessimism of the intellect. But optimism of the will is like, you know what? We're gonna, like we're gonna go and we're gonna solve it along the way. It's kind of like building like a bridge, right? It's like, okay, like the bridge could fall in like 100 different ways, and this could happen and that could happen, this could happen, that could happen. But it's like, you know what? We can calculate it, we can figure it out. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so I think most people just don't in internalize nearly enough to like what that means, right? What experimenting means and what failing means. And to be clear, I don't think anything has failed today, right? Like we, it's just like, yeah. But it's, I think, like I really like this term because it like it captures that like dichotomy or like that little sort of like thing that you have to your mind where the founder has to be like irrationally optimistic and convicted about what like, well, as you say, we're on futility 1,000%. We really are, right? Like we
We
fucking like,
are.
like Prophet flew in, like everyone flew in, we built this fucking thing, like it's like we are really gonna make it succeed, right? And at the same time, right, like the moment sort of like it doesn't work, and that doesn't mean sort of like the first sign of trouble, right? But it's like, like we keep an open mind, we are aware of the failure cases, and when sort of like it's time to go, then we go, right? Like, or we move. But again, right, so there's like that's yeah, that's kind of like that's this pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. So I really like that. Yeah.
So then, I mean, I appreciate you describing those two concepts, and I'm wondering how you, as a founder, leading this project, how do you try to balance those two things? Like, how do you philosophically kind of feel about where are you on the spectrum, if you don't mind my asking?
I think, I mean, this is sort of like probably not so much like governance related discussion, right? But like when I think a lot of the time, like the issue we found is not the execution. I mean, although that is like certainly a high bar to meet, but just sort of like the mental blocks that you put on yourself, right? Like anxieties, like neurotic, like neurosis, things like, what if this doesn't work? And it's like that kind of like things that block you from doing the things that you need to do, right? Like it could be, and for me, like I'm sort of like more of like a humble guy, like a nice guy. I don't like to sort of like attack, people. I always want people to get along, right? I don't want to like, compete. I'm not like the sort of like sort of like attack dog, and that is like, a trait that rubs people the wrong way, but it's a very useful trait for a startup founder, that's sort of like disagreeable nature, right? And like really kind of like attack. Um and sort of like I wasn't raised this way, right? But I think like, yeah, there are a lot of these sort of like traits, right? That are really kind of like self-limiting beliefs. And I think the way that in which we succeed is by removing a lot of these like self-limiting beliefs, and yet obviously not going too far in that extreme where you're very pig-headed, very dogmatic. You're like, okay, no, like like the Eve Maxis, for example, right? They're like completely sort of like, I mean, the stereotype of the Eve Maxis, let me just say, right? Because yeah, but that like, and so you have, again, like everything is a contradiction, right? You've got to be convicted and yet agile at the same time. You've got to be deluded and yet clear-headed at the same time. It's just all these like, you've got to go into something believing that it's going to be the best thing in the world, yet you've got to be incredibly aware of all the flaws of your products and what might fail and who might come and eat a lunch and these and all these things. So it's like, yeah, it's just this duality that plays out again and again and again, and just like walking that tightrope is super important. I don't have all the answers, right? I'm learning from everyone, from Miao, from Seong, right, from all the founders, from Toli, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I think that really segues very nicely into kind of what the not I wouldn't call it the main purpose of this call. Like, I mean, this is really, again, why are we having this stream? Hi, everybody. I've noticed there are hundreds of people who have joined the stream since we started, and we're at about 1.5K. Thank you very much for joining. But yeah, the reason why we started we're having the stream is because we've noticed some of the comments and the dialogue and the discussion around Cloud 2, and in one aspect we're like super excited. And like, why are we excited? Because people are actually participating. Like, that's actually that I mean, it's not a small
Super
amount of
amazing.
participation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like hundreds and hundreds of comments, right? Like spread across the Discord, spread across the research.sanctum.so, spread across Twitter. Like,
Mm.
I have been, my timeline has been blowing up with people asking questions. They would like clarification. What exactly are the intentions and the plan? And that's what we're here to discuss, right? But we're also here to discuss, what does Sanctum governance look like for us? Because like, FP, another comment that I get is like, I noticed that since like we don't have a governance identity, let's call it, right, like the Sanctum way of governance, people are what I've noticed is people start to gravitate towards known mental models of how governance works in other communities, which is fair, right? Because they're trying to hang the situation on the context of a hanger that they already have in their closet, right? And there isn't a so-called sanctum hanger for for them to hang context on, right? And so you'll see comparisons to Jupiter, you'll see comparisons to perhaps even Orca, you'll see comparisons to like all different types of protocols, like how they're doing it, because a lot of the terms, like what does ASR even mean in the Sanctum context versus the Jupiter context? Like, these are all really fair questions, and it's like, you can answer these questions one on one on Twitter and Discord in the research center. But also, what would be more efficient is just to have like a very chilled discussion, where and like, by the way, guys, I should probably say this like more throughout the stream. If you have questions, or things that you've already asked on Twitter or Discord or the research center, like, please just put them in the comments. Like, I'm looking at them right now. I'm literally looking at all the comments, waiting for people to ask interesting questions so that we can literally just answer them right now. That being said, there are a couple of comments and things that I've been waiting for when we get in the really substantial part of this conversation to cover. But just as a word of it, or some encouragement, if there was a question that you asked, either about, say, Sanctum staking, Sanctum ASR, what exactly is the timeline and the plan given the current status of Cloud 2 and the discussions surrounding it? Um, Anything meta discussions about futarchy or whatever, like, this is why we're here, and like why we're talking with you and why we're on the stream, because we feel that this is the most efficient way to directly communicate and make clear our intentions and what the current thinking is, and emphasis on current thinking. Again, things might change based on new information. And so, like, we might say one thing on this governance corner, and if we feel the need to do another governance corner in the future, our views might change on something, but it'll always be based on something new that we learned, right? It's not some arbitrary, like, because we feel like it, like, what are you going to do? Like, that's not that what it's about. It's like, because we are listening. We are deeply, deeply, deeply listening. And that's why, you know, things can and will change. And that's okay.
Yeah. And yeah, and that is okay. And people sort of always say like, oh, you changed your mind. And it's like, well, yeah. Like, great, right? Like, isn't that good? Right? I mean, obviously you don't want to be sort of like flip-flopping, daily. But yeah, it's like changing your mind, based on good evidence is a great trait to have. I look for that in founders that I invest in and people that I work with and so on and so forth. Yeah. Um, yeah. So should we go into the
Yeah.
proposal, or like how should we?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I got a couple of questions here, already kind of collected from the community, and or even comments, right, that I'd love to cover. So let me pull up one of these. Um, so there's one question here. Let's see. Sorry, just trying to. There's so many comments. um,
Thank you for collating them. I appreciate it. Yeah.
yeah, it's fine. So, one question that people had
Mm,
about cloud governance, or in Funtarchy, is
mm,
like, on the last forecast, which was
yeah.
today's a Sunday. We had that call on a Wednesday, so it's like 5 days ago, right? We said, what was the plan, right? The plan that we communicated in front of 12,000 people, is that there's going to be a 7-day period of collecting feedback, right? And after we collected 7 days of feedback, then the following Wednesday, which would fall exactly around the time of the next forecast call, we were going to put Cloud 2 up for a vote, right? I'll even go one step further. If you look at the Cloud 1 proposal, where and this is something that has been pointed out and screenshotted and sent to me multiple times, but if you look at the Cloud 1 proposal, at the end of the Cloud 1 proposal, it made it very clear that active staking rewards would become live with the voting of Cloud 2, right? So let me just repeat that one more time, just because I very long-winded, right? But for Cloud 2, right, the plan is 7-day discussion period, followed by 3 days of voting, right? The discussion period started last Wednesday with the forecast call, and it should officially end with the next forecast call, which was, as originally planned, put up for a futarchy vote for 3 days, right? Starting from the next forecast call. So that would be in 3 days. Since that call, we've gotten a lot of feedback. And also, if you look at the Cloud 1 proposal, it says there are going to be active staking rewards starting from Cloud 2, which theoretically is supposed to start this Wednesday. So, two questions for you, FP. This is directly from the community. Question number one: what is the current status of either putting up Cloud 2 or not putting up Cloud 2? What is your current thinking? What information do you have? What information don't you have? What information do you need from the community to proceed?
Right. So let's talk about Cloud 2, right? So Cloud 2, right, the Cloud 2 that was on the research forums is should Sanctum deploy out to 10 million cloud in the sort of Hawk 5 vaults and Meteora DRM pools, right? And that was sort of like, for Cloud 2, we sort of, I gave sort of like three options, right? We could do we could do a Meteora pool, we could do like Hawksite, Hawksite and Meteora, or we could just do like nothing right now, right? Option 3 would be like do nothing right now. And sort of like there was a lot of kind of like feedback, right? And sort of like the general, I mean, again, right, we don't have like exact sort of like figures because that's not right. Um, um, but it's sort of like general feedback, but like in general, people sort of like don't really like either of those two options, and they like option 3 in general, right? They like, okay, I think we should not sort of like put the liquidity in any sort of way, and we should kind of like we should kind of just leave it as it is. So kind of like that was the sort of like feedback that the sensing that I got, right, in general. And so like there are kind of like two options, right, for us, right? Either we sort of like pick an option, one of these two options, and put it up to a vote, right? Anyway, right? Or right, we sort of like redo this sort of proposal, right, into something that can pass, right? And I mean, maybe not can pass, but like we put it up, rework the proposal into something that people sort of like that would potentially be voted on, or right, we just sort of like shelve this one, right, for now, right? We can revisit it at a later time, right? And then we do a totally new proposal, right? And for each one, there are sort of like pros and cons. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, if there are any people out there who are looking at this, we're that this is my screen I'm referring to. Of course, if you're on the
Mm.
stream, you're watching. But if there are any people out there looking at the Cloud 2 proposal on research.sanctum.so, again, the question is, should Sanctum deploy up to 10 million cloud in HawkFi Cloud USDC vaults and or Meteor DLMM pools? I also noticed that in a lot of the discussions, people don't make the distinction between the 7 million in liquidity that's provided. I mean, it kind of depends. Like in Meteor, it's like spot wide, right? And
Mm.
for HawkFi, I forget the specific detail, but anyways, it's like 7 million in total. And then you have 3 million in incentives, right? And what I almost feel like is a lot of the discussion is fixated on this particular piece, the 3 million, right? But then they, because of kind of how information disseminates and, it gets lower and lower resolution as people it's like a game of telephone, right? Where you
Mm.
have people who read the proposal and they hyperfixate on on a single point that gets posted onto different channels. And then other people who did not read the source material are working off of kind of secondary source now, and then they kind of amplify and kind of morph what is, and it's not misinformation in the sense that like people are intentionally trying to spread misinformation. That's not what's going on here. It's more like there are impressions of what this proposal is, and I almost feel like sometimes there's some commentary that's like super on the mark and people know exactly what they're talking about, and I appreciate that. And there are other well-intentioned people who are trying to keep up with the proposal and maybe don't even understand like how Meteora or Hawkfly works, which is like totally legitimate, and like I understand like not everyone is gonna understand how to deploy liquidity and what exactly that means. But what they just hear is incentives, and they just apply it to like all the cloud, and really what they think is like we're just like providing incentives,
Mm.
to whales is quite frankly the feedback. And so, do you want to perhaps like dig a little deeper into the proposal, or perhaps you want to stay zoomed out and kind of still have this more like maybe not go too deep into the proposal? I'm giving you options here, however you think this would be maximally productive. Also, anybody in the comment section, if you have any ideas of what you'd like to hear, please let us know.
Yeah, I think some meta level comments, right? Like kind of like people were sort of commenting on basically sort of like, oh, why did you choose the numbers that you chose, right? And I think a lot of it is just I work to find like a reasonable number, but there's no like exact sort of like number, and I don't think there can be sort of like an exact number. And I think um like that is also some maybe a limitation of like the deliberation process, which is that if we want to tweak the numbers, right, it does, if we had to vote on every single number, like that would take like forever, right? And so it's just kind of like get a sensing, and that's like I'm not entirely happy with this sort of like approach either, right? But right, I think it would be like that. Like I think for now, like that's sort of like what we have. And then I guess the other thing is also, I think how far actually made a really good point, right? Which is that there are actually kind of like two things being sort of like, um, being voted on, and you pointed out as well. There is sort of like the first, like, should Sanctum provide liquidity at these levels, right? In order to reduce sort of like buy price impact. That's like first question. And second of all, should Sanctum incentivize LPs, right? And that's these are actually sort of like two different things to be voted on and discussed on. And potentially, right, I think one learning is like some people really like the incentives, right? Some people don't like the incentives. Some people like the sort of like the deploying the cloud. Actually most people didn't like that. But maybe a few did as well. And so it's like, yeah, it's like I feel like maybe the learning here is also like we've got to make these proposals like a lot more atomic, if that makes sense. And so like it's, that then it becomes kind of like um yeah, then it becomes a lot like easier to kind of like reason about, and then the discussion doesn't sort of like become balloon and become sort of like unproductive. Yeah, so those are kind of like the thoughts that I have about sort of like the feedback. But I really will say that like I am really really pleased and really really like just very grateful for all of the comments, because I made sure to put in this proposal. Like I'm not an expert on LPs and stuff, but a lot of people in the community are, and right, and it was like amazing, right? I'm like, oh, they're like, well, I've been LPing for years and here are my thoughts, and it's like, wow, I learned a lot. And everyone in the community learned a lot as well, so I really, I think like there was like a big shout out for um this T Degen, right? If you sort of scroll down a bit, and like I thought like that was like an amazing sort of like post from, yeah, that's the post, right? So like, I thought that was like, I mean, a lot of them are sort of really good, but like that's the one that a lot of people like, and I like as well. Yeah. So yeah, sorry, this was like kind of like a bit like rambly, a little bit all
No,
over the
this is
place,
perfect,
but
and this
yeah.
is perfect. And so here's a couple of ideas that I heard expressed from you, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I do pride I don't know, not pride myself. What? It's like I do enjoy kind of like trying to understand where you're coming from, and then like feeding it back to you, and then seeing whether or not that actually drives like, and just saying it in a different way, and hopefully we can all kind of coalesce around like what is this discussion about, right? So, one potential learning, throughout this whole process, is that, yeah, and actually, this is more of a question now I think about it. What did you mean by like this proposal was really kind of two things, and really in the future we should try to make them more atomic, right? Could you kind of explain that a little bit more, what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. So this proposal was like, okay, well, like it's okay, it's tricky. But like, proposals. It, so first of all, this proposal had like like sort of like three different options, right? It had like kind of like yeah, it was like the Meteora thing, and it was the Hawkeye thing, and it was like the do nothing proposal. I mean, do nothing is not, but it's like at least two decision points. And then even within these two decision points, they were like, well, there are many things to pick apart, right? There's like this, there's like, okay, well, we could deploy this amount into Meteora, and then we would also sort of like have incentives there, right? And then for the Hawkside one, we would deploy some in Meteora, some in Hawkside, and then have additional incentives as well. And so like there become like a lot of sort of like decision points where like even if kind of it's kind of like a senator writes like this 400-page bill, and there's like a like 100 things in there, and you might like the three of them but not the other 97. And I mean, it's not that bad, but it's like that's kind of like a problem. I mean, and also the other thing is like when kind of like I posted sort of like atomic thing, right? Then people are like, well, you're not giving us options. You kind of like take it or leave it. And I also do take that point, right? And so kind of like here I try to give sort of like the two options, that we're thinking about. But that also has its own challenges because it makes discussion more difficult. So yeah, that's yeah. So we want it. We ideally it's like we coalesce on like a single sort of like point, yes or no, right? A single sort of like decision point. But at the same time, we want to make people feel like, oh, they are heard, right? That they are, it's not like a take it or leave it. It's not like a rubber stamp. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so, Bang Shark says, and hello, Bang Sharks, good to see you again. Agree. Cloud 2 is quite complex because it has a lot of discussion points. It's hard to discuss a third option because of this. And just adding on to that, it just echoing exactly what FP just said. Um, Not only does it have a lot of discussion points, but it's kind of like how are things normally done in like, let's say, a working group or even in American Congress, right? It's like you have committees and subcommittees, right, that work on very specific issues. And the reason why they do this is because you can't have hundreds of representatives or like 100 senators all talking about everything all the time. Like you just can't do that, right? Like like there's a certain point where it's literally more efficient to have like people who are like a part of this committee and working together, and like this is your main focus. Like you focus on foreign affairs, you work on like domestic taxes, like you work on like finance, you work on military. Like it's and you might work on multiple committees, but like you have your areas of focus. It's just like a Discord chat room, right? Even a Discord chat room, I mean, maybe there are some rock stars out there who can read every single channel, but most people have the things that they care about, if that makes sense, right? And and they can't read all the channels. They read the channels that are relevant to them. And what's tricky about a proposal like this that has kind of like multiple moving pieces and or options is, as FP pointed out earlier, there are some aspects of the proposal where people feel really either positive or negative towards incentives, right? And that's kind of disambiguated from a completely different topic, which is like, should we even be providing liquidity at these price levels? And then there's many things to debate here. Is this the right price range, right? Like, should it be like 10 to 20 cents and then additional liquidity upwards? And then like,
Yeah. Too many. It's lots of
it's like it's too
parameters,
much.
like too many
Yeah.
parameters. So I think that's kind of like why I'm leaning towards like let's like scrap it. I'm not scrap it, but like let's kind of like okay. I've learned a lot about like how I should craft a proposal that is going to be like meaningfully discussed by the community. I've learned a lot, right? It's like not that the proposal was bad. It was just perhaps not suited, right? For like it's just too complex, too many moving parts, right? It's difficult to, like get a and yeah. And so that is what I have learned actually from this Cloud 2 proposal. Yeah.
And I don't think that lesson just applies to you. And because uh, we really, really, really want knowledgeable and passionate community members who know how to um, take their ideas. Like, see, it's one thing to be a person who has great ideas. and there are many talented people out there who have really, really good ideas. But there's this other kind of neglected piece, and it's more of like a like the meta of like how you communicate it, but it's equally as important. It's the same as, and
It's
you know,
probably more
this is
important, right? Getting buy-in for your
yeah,
ideas, actually. Yeah. Than having the great idea. Oh, which
absolutely.
is also good. Yeah.
And I think that that point has been proven time and time again in many different areas of life, right? This includes startup ideas, right? You can have the greatest idea and like even know how you're supposed to implement it versus like actually implementing it. Like those are two very different things, right? Same as like you have a great idea for governance, but and not politics, but like how do you efficiently explain your idea and then have it pass in a productive way where people can actually talk and give feedback in a concentrated way where it actually has value and it can even be progressive and you can even outline steps. Like there's like a million ways to write a proposal. There's no template for this, guys. It's truly situation dependent and also depends on the proposal itself. um but it's like, again, like you see this pattern all throughout life: ideas versus execution, right? And this is not just a lesson for FP, it's a lesson to all of us, right? Like, and I think that we're gonna have epiphanies every week, new epiphanies. But
It's good. It means we're
perhaps,
learning. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. You know, I had made a comment in the team chat where I said like, hey, like, you know, I'm not trying to criticize, like I'm just trying to objectively observe the situation as it is. And you said your immediate response was no, criticize. That is what makes us better. But it's not just about criticism, it's about like improvement. Like that is a constant theme, not just for Sanctum governance, but also Sanctum product. Um, Even the way that we're trying to run community, there are honest and reasonable disagreements about like what this should look like, even internally. But like this is all a learning process of like how do we do this, right? And this stream is completely impromptu. It was decided yesterday around, I think, like 1 a.m. our time. We're just like, all right, we're doing the stream. We're gonna talk about this. Yes, it's sudden, but it's really efficient. And I really enjoyed doing this. I wish we could get some more questions though. I wish, you know, people. I mean, we've definitely talked our way towards a conclusion, but my only dissatisfaction with this conversation, even though I very much enjoyed it, is like I want more questions. You know, people got any questions? I want more. I know that Jeshik is watching. I know a lot of the Cloud Masters are watching. I know that Bang is here. I but it's also kind of like I feel like we're at a point in the discussion where we're not specifically even talking about Cloud 2 itself, but kind of like
Yeah.
learnings from Cloud 2.
We
um,
uh, we did have some questions about sort of like when staking will come out and whether or not the Cloud 2 will be delayed
mm,
and things like that. I think like there are a couple of options here. Well, first of all, sort of like ASR is calculated on the number of votes, right? It's not like, you know, just because Cloud 2 is pushed back, if it is pushed back, right? To be clear, it, you know, may not be. You know, it just means that, you know, whatever your ASR will be spread over like just one fewer vote, right? So it's not the end of the world, I think. I mean, you're still gonna get the full like thing that was voted on and allocated on. Yeah, the hard deadline for staking is that we're gonna try to push it out next week, right? You know, I'm kind of reluctant sort of like to commit to things on stream, but at least the internal deadline for the team is like, yeah, staking will be out next week. Um, yeah, you know, barring some, you know, emergency and stuff, but yeah, we are looking very hard to get it out next week staking. Yeah, and I think there are kind of like two options. Right, one is that we could put up like a like we could sort of let's just let Cloud 2 just go to voting, right? Clean up potentially cleaning up a bit, or right, we can think about coming up with a new proposal, right? And then either right we do like a shorter deliberation time, right? Which is, you know, it has its pros and cons, right? But it would get us to the schedule, or we can keep the uh deliberation time, sorry, and then we be pushing everything back, right? And that would be also pros and cons, right? It would give the proposal time to breathe, full discussion, right? Get in the best version of the proposal, but at the same time, right, it'll mess up the forecast, we'll be delaying our schedule and so on. So yeah, those are sort of like, again, like pros and cons. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, like I definitely I got this piece of community feedback on Twitter. And the feedback was, you know, you guys need to stay on schedule. You guys communicated a date for like how this would work. And if you change it, like, it means that it somehow implies that, I don't know, you're not serious about it, or like I'm not quite sure. Like I think that the people come at it from different angles, right? So some
Mm.
of it is like, uh some people, or it's more of a feeling than it is like an articulated point. But the feeling is like if you're pushing it, you're losing momentum. Like that's one aspect of it. If you push it, then like, people like, is ASR happening, and there's anxiety around that, and I totally understand anxiety. Um we lost FP, but that's totally okay. I know he'll be back. I'm sure that he just pressed the wrong button or something. Oh, here he is. See? No problem.
Sorry, my bad.
No, 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 no.
No.
It's fine. It's fine. I'm sure you just pressed the wrong button or something.
Yeah.
I do that all the time. I'm in a Google Meet, and then suddenly I'm out of the team discussion. I'm like, oh no, oh no, get back in the chat. um, but as I was saying, like, some people feel a type of way that like it's possible that Cloud 2, um, or Cloud 3, like what exactly we called it, like whether it's literally Cloud 2 or another
Sure.
proposal, um,
Yeah.
either active this Wednesday, like there's this like emotional attachment to like you have to stick to the schedule, and that's where I'll push back. And I'm happy to be wrong on this, like, in the sense that like if people push back harder on my pushback, that's actually how I think life works a lot of time. You have a point, and then someone pushes back on you, and then you keep doing this back and forth until you either arrive at an equilibrium, or someone just feels like, oh, okay, that's like a fair point, right? And you take
Mm.
out your ego. And that's a difficult process even for me, just to take out your ego out of it and be like, what objectively is the best, right, for Cloud and for Sanctum, right?
Mm.
But in this case, like, here's my pushback to the community, and FP, please correct me if you feel a different way, right? Um, Governance done right is better than governance done quick, right? That does not mean slow roll governance, and take your time with it, and like whistle while you work, and don't have community discussions. Quite the contrary. Like the reason why we're having this stream right now is because we felt a sense of expediency. Like we have to address and talk, and
Yeah.
try to understand how people feel and communicate how we feel. And like I'm hoping that this stream leads to like a bunch of other discussions about like, what does
Mm.
Sanctum governance look like? What do we do with Cloud 2? Like, would you like to draft another proposal? Here's one for you right now. In fact, hey, if there's anyone in the stream that has an excellent proposal that they just have in their back pocket and think would just be great for this
Script it
website, and
out. Yeah.
understand, yeah, no, but seriously, like, we would not mind. Hence decentralization, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about it right now on the stream. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, seriously.
No, I mean, so
uh,
I will kind of like push back a little bit, right? But like I sort of like broadly, like, first of all, I think at Sanctum we try to be like charitable, right? And so like things don't like I would implore everyone sort of like to practice this in their lives, right? In general, right? Which is that, hey, like sometimes things don't go along to, you know, like up to plan, right? Like I, as a team, I always want to ship things like yesterday, right? As soon as possible, right? Like obviously. And you like yelling at someone, when the thing doesn't go the way you want, or there's unexpected delays, usually is counterproductive. Like in the sense that like I'm already very motivated to ship things on time, and when you know like yelling at us isn't necessarily going to help, even though it might make you feel better. And this is just advice for like in general, like I think not even like on the Sanctum side, right? But also kind of like I want to be really sort of like conscious of the fact that every kind of like everything that I say, like we say, like an announcement that we make to our user is like a promise we make, and every time it's delayed, it's like a break of the promise. And like there can be good reasons for it, right? There can be like many reasons for it, but I just want to be conscious of the fact that when we say this will be out by X, that's a promise, right? And like we don't want to break it lightly. We don't want even to break it moderately, right? We just like, that's a promise. Every time we we break that promise, we lose the user trust, right? We lose the kind of like ability for them to say like, well, Sanctum team has said this and they will do it, right? And that's like something I want to be very, very, very hyper aware of. Yeah. And in a case like this, like, look, I mean, it's the proposal can still go up, right? If we want to. It's just like this is why I'm kind of having this community feedback session to figure out what to do with Cloud 2 and draft a new one if need be. Right? Yeah, does that make sense?
I think it makes perfect sense. And in fact, I have a comment in the chat that I think perfectly explains like an example of a community vibe, and it's not exactly let me just put it up, and you'll know exactly what I mean.
Sure.
From Johnny. Wonder if FP would care to comment on my comment in the chat. I actually was looking through all the chat. I do not know what you're referring to, but that's not even the important part. The important part is this: knowing it's not this simplistic, but we seem to have gone from saying that number one, we're full on Feutarchy into the forum,
Mm, mm.
in the chat having a say, and then a poll on X, right? So I think what Johnny is trying to articulate is that like, hey, you said you'd be on full on Feutarchy, but then you're putting on polls on X. Like, how does that make sense? And truly, Johnny, no, 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 seriously, truly, Johnny, we do not have established processes for everything, right? And this is what I was talking about earlier in terms of experimentation and exploring and trying a new governance system that hasn't creating a new governance system and something that we haven't even done since Athens. There's even things that to you would seem like super basic, like, hey, like if the discussion is leaning towards a particular way where it looks like the vote is going to fail even if we put it up, right?
Mm.
And like what is like is there a corrective mechanism? Like there's not even a real corrective mechanism where we can take community feedback in a systematic way and then incorporate it back into the proposal in a way that feels fair. Like that system actually needs to be worked out. Like, and
Yeah,
yeah,
let,
it's
let,
we
let me say
yeah.
something. So two things, right? First of all, like, thank you, Johnny, for your comment. I think that's a really good comment, right? And I think there are two things I would say in response. Like, first is that we are all in Futaki. We are, right? Um, it's but even Futaki requires like a meta process, right, around it. So as I've said, like even if like okay, Futaki is like if the proposal goes on a vote, right, there's this whole like buying and selling thing, right, and then the vote passes, and then like the team implements it or not, depends on whether like that's like Futaki, that's full Futan, right? But even MetaDAO, right, which is like the most retarded organization, I mean, they literally exist to push Futaki, right? They've still got the process for like, well, which proposals go on for vote, right? Like, well, like for example, right, like there was like a Thea research wanted to do the OTC, right? There was like this and that. It's like, and it's like, are they gonna let anyone come in and say like, I want an OTC $10, right? Like they're probably not gonna do that, or like Prophet would tell them to go pound sand, right? So like even if you are sort of like full Futaki, there does seem to be still a meta level process needed, right? To sort of like get proposals in, discuss proposals, edit proposals, and then put them up to be voted on Futaki, right? So I want to make clear that even if we are like 100% Futaki, which we are, right? It's like they're still gonna have that process, and we as said, we don't have process yet, right? For we don't have good process. We're working through it, how to get that meta level process. That's the
Yeah.
first thing, right? Yeah, and then I think the second thing is that the poll on X is just a temperature check. It's not binding, right? I just wanted to see kind of what people thought, right? And it's all of like this consultative process, right? None of that is binding, right? What is binding will be the sort of like the Fujaki vote, right? And that's kind of like it's not no, the vote on X is not. I just want to be clear, right? The vote on X was just a temperature check, and I think again this is part of the meta level process. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was the perfect way to describe it. We were genuinely, because here's the thing, because we don't have a system to like truly aggregate all the comments across like three different avenues, like three different sources. um we have a gut feel for how people think. Like it's very like I mean we read everything, so like we definitely know like what the vibes are, but vibes are not numbers. You can't not make decisions off of vibes. You can't just be like, well, it feels like people don't like it, so like just change the whole thing. Like that is but at the same time, so we wanted something that was more high definition than vibes, which was a poll, but even the poll itself, who even sees it? Like, is it even official? Like, is this how we're making decisions now? No, that's not how we're
It's
making
not
decisions,
official.
right?
It's not. I want to be clear.
No.
It's not official. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. But the poll was, again, a more higher resolution, like, of because we do not have this meta process, which, I'll be honest with you, was not immediately clear to me when we started this entire endeavor, like how important the meta process surrounding futarchy is. And truly, I think that you could have 100 different DAOs using futarchy, and their meta processes could be completely different, right? And I actually would prefer if we weren't literally. This is the blessing and the curse of doing unique things that add value to a project. Is that if you're the first to do it, you're the first that has to figure it all out
Yeah,
and
we
put it
have
all
all the
together.
teething problems. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, but that's it. Both gives me goosebumps, and it also means that there's real work to do, right? And that's not something to be scared of. That's something to embrace. And quite frankly, we need your help. We really need
Yeah.
people who are putting up proposals, and we need people who are voting on those proposals. We need people. We need like almost like I mean, back when I was working in corporate life, we would call it institutional knowledge, right? And institutional knowledge is like when you join an organization, there's like a bunch of historical, cultural things that people just kind of all agree on, and those things and those values and those processes that they all agree on have been built upon by generations and generations of office workers before them, right? But it's become this kind of institutional knowledge that everyone just takes as a given, and that's how the organization operates, and that's how you go, right? The same will happen with Sanctum Futarchy if it succeeds, right? If Sanctum Futarchy succeeds, we will build up institutional, or perhaps we call it like cloud sourced. I'm sorry, I can't stop. Cloud source knowledge, where we have built from generations of funtards, as well as Sanctum believers and believers in the token, like proposal writers, people who have like we will build up a culture of what this meta process for futarchy around Sanctum looks like. Um, and that is becoming like throughout this conversation, like this has become very, very clear to me. And it's not something that was even clear to me before this call. Like I kind of had that idea in my subconscious, but now it's suddenly in the forefront of my mind. Like, oh wow, like that's the secret sauce. Like that's the 13 spices in KFC, right? Like that's what separates my mom's fried chicken, which is still delicious, from the Colonel's fried chicken, which is a $1 billion business. Seriously, that it's those 13 spices, and finding each spice is very hard. And it's not just each spice, but each spice in combination with each other.
The devil's in the details, but I again, right, like we spend a lot of time talking about how difficult this process is, but we've got, again, optimism of the will. We will figure it out, right? Like this is what, like, week two of, I mean, week 2 or 3 of like this grand experiment. So it's like we'll figure it out, right? Like, and we'll figure it out. We don't need 2,000 years to figure it out. We'll like we'll maybe 2 more weeks, 2 more months, and we'll figure it out. And we'll keep refining it. So I'm pretty optimistic about this. Yeah. Johnny says,
Yeah.
like, I think FP knows I struggle with Futaki process, but I'm trying. Thank you for that. Like, I always appreciate when people share my values, which is like open-minded, willing to try, right? Friendly towards failure. I think those are all the values that we should strive towards. So it's like I really appreciate people taking the time and effort to learn, to understand, and to participate. I really do. Yeah.
So we have we love this man. I'd just like to repeat this and shout from the mountaintops. Jay is the happiest of warriors. I can't even describe what he does at Sanctum, because he does everything. I mean, there's the back end processes and then the front end processes. Like this is, he's really our Swiss Army knife of Sanctum. And I wish there was a grander tool that I could use than Swiss Army knife, because it's like a nuclear Swiss Army knife. But anyways, he writes, I think that there are two separate processes here, and I don't know what user. That's probably like an emoji or something, but I have no idea. There's a proposal, discussion, and vote. Proposal and discussion versus vote, right? The vote will always be futarchy, but we haven't necessarily established the discussion and proposal phase, and this is what FP and I mean when we are talking about the meta process, right? Like how exactly do we discuss and propose and tweak? Actually, I would add tweak to that. Like what's the process by which you change? Like, okay, the community is on board with this kind of like 80%, but there's this kind of niggling thing right here, this particular point that's just like, I can't quite get on board. But
Yeah.
it's like, it's
It should
great,
have
but the
been like,
numbers,
it's great.
you know?
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like everything about this proposal is great, except I would double that number or I would half this number, right? How do we deal with
Right.
that? It's like, well, people are
Yep.
like, no, keep it as it is. No, double it. No, half it. It's like, you know, I don't know. We have to, and also the
Yep.
details, right? It's like, okay, like maybe we do agree on this and the number, but it's like in implementation detail. I think we should do it like this, and I think we should do it like that. And it's like, well, I don't know. We'll figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Dero, I haven't fully read this comment, but it looks somewhat thoughtful. So I'm actually going to put this up if you don't mind. Don't know if I got it wrong, but putting out proposals and letting the market decide is futarchy 100%, right? Picking proposals should be done on the forum or Discord, discussing whether or not a proposal will pass, and only if it's favorable to put up on a vote. It's not exactly futarchy, in my opinion. Um, yes, and well, I'm gonna leave this up just so people can read it on at their own speed. Um, but I truly view it as a part of futarchy in the sense that like yeah, you're correct. Like when we talk about like the mechanisms and what people mean when they say futarchy, like they're talking about like how you judge the economic value of a proposal. Like that part of what you're saying is 100% true. Like I'm not really disagreeing with you in any substantial way, but I guess the way I would try to phrase it is that while the process by which you put up a proposal to a vote is not exactly futarchy, like you need that to go well in order for futarchy to actually have its intended effect. Like while your point is true, I think it misses one thing, which is that like yes, it's not exactly futarchy, which is totally accurate, but it's also a very crucial element to making sure that futarchy actually works. Because if your meta process is a mess and you don't have, it just means that you will have low quality proposals or even semi decent proposals that go up for a vote or go up for discussion even, and there's no way to there because it's so static.
I mean, we
It's
can
hard
think about sort of
to
like there's like two extremes of meta process, right? One is like any proposal, put it up permissionlessly, we'll just like let the market decide, right? And like that could probably
mm,
that could work. I mean, that's bold, right? It's but like maybe we would be inundated with like 100 fucking like proposals, and then people will get really tired of like fuck you know I have to vote like 100 times a day. Are you serious? Or right, or like it's like the proposals have to be like strictly vetted by the team. We've got to go through like multiple rounds of the consultation process, and then the proposals are all incredibly high quality, but it's like one proposal like every 2 months or 3 months. It's like, that like somewhere between, like that. It's like, and but both are all like
yeah.
pure futarchy, right? But it's like that meta process of like filtering out these proposals and bringing them to a vote is actually like just as important. And I don't think it compromises on futarchy. I think it's a similar point to what sort of like Johnny mentioned. Yeah.
Oh man, I wanna clip that. I want to repeat that for emphasis. That was such a good point. Like for the meta process, there's two extremes. Oh, that was so good. I think that was perfectly phrased. One is you do it completely permissionless, and then like the obvious con of the and like the beauty of it is permissionless, so everybody feels heard, right? But also you end up with like a meme coin situation in the sense that you're just inundated with a flood of just like constant just grab attention, grab attention, grab attention, and then in like that becomes a separate game in itself. That's like not. I mean, it could work and it's bold in its own way, but it's also just like it introduces a lot of maybe unintentional consequences, right? Which is just like governance fatigue. Maybe perhaps, I mean, quite frankly, a flood of mid-tier proposals, right? And with lots of reading, with very little outcome for any of them, right? And then you're just voting, voting, voting. And the other practical extreme, which is like, you know, really strict process has to follow exactly this template or this mechanism that whatever we design, and it's designed specifically by the team, and then only like one or two proposals go through, and then it's just nobody feels heard, and it's like then there's this whole like drama on the timeline, like, oh, this guy gets his proposals up, and like we're like, well, he writes the most high quality proposals and follows the guidelines, and it's like we want to be in the middle, and we don't. We're somewhere here in this spectrum. It's not either of those, I don't think. My personal opinion. I don't represent the team, but like the team's opinion, but like it doesn't seem like either of those. It has to be somewhere there, right?
Exactly. And so this is us kind of like hashing out the meta process, I think. Like that's exactly right. To make sure that, I mean, again, right? It's like every vote that we put up to the community is an ask for the community. Please take your time and look and discuss and and vote with your wallet if need be, right? I mean, that's how Futaki works, right? And it's like we've got to make sure that the signal to noise ratio there is good. Because like again, I'm conscious of what I ask people to take out and to do. And but at the same time, yeah, we don't want it to go all into the way to the other direction because we're here to move fast and so that's kind of like the trade-off here. Yeah, and that's all I have to say on the
I
matter. Yeah.
the only thing that annoys me about this is that like it takes me a long time to try to go around what I'm trying to say, and then you just say something like, "Yeah, we're trying to increase signal to noise," and they go like, "Yeah, I could have just said that. That's exactly correct." Concise, to the point. FP, thank you.
Signal to noise. Yeah.
Oh, dude, that okay, funny, but also hurt my
I'm
feelings like a
sorry,
little
no, I
bit,
love
just
you.
like just
Yeah.
a little bit. I will keep that in mind when I write 20 messages in the group chat. Signal to noise, fair enough. If I had more time, I would write less, as one writer put it.
Pascal, I think. Yeah.
People say Mark Twain, but I think that's been whatever. But Pascal, sure, why not? Maybe we got time for like two more comments, and then we'll wrap this up. Like guys, if you liked this, there's over 2,000 people like watching us like hash through the state of Sanctum governance, kind of where we are with Cloud 2, what are our philosophical views on not only meta process, but like what does good governance look like, and what does experimentation look like? It means that we might try things, and that we have to go back to the drawing board to make sure that we're doing it right. We've talked about a lot of things throughout this call, but just to bring up, let's see, William DK, right? So the idea of discussing this is precisely to shape the proposal so that it is as optimized as possible, just like in Cloud 1, where the initial proposal was changed and the improved proposal was very pleasing to most people. Putting a proposal to a vote that was clearly not to your liking would be a waste of time and money, since in Futarchy would have to sell tokens to disapprove a vote. Yeah, I mean that's definitely I think a very fair way of looking at it, right? It's what do you do in a situation where, and again, we haven't established these processes yet, but you guys, we will move very quickly based on the feedback that we've gotten so far. What to define and solidify what this meta process is. Um, like in Cloud 1, it was very clean cut. Change it from 50 million to 30 million, bing, bang, boom, launch, right? And then everybody just loved that proposal. It passed with flying colors, right? Um, but in this case, where in Cloud 2, we had lots of great community discussion, and a lot of it was not in favor of Cloud 2. What do
I
you do in this case, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually have a thought here, which I've been meaning
Mm,
to kind of like bring up, which is that with Cloud 2 we'll have staking, and with staking we'll have sort of like staking score, right? That may not that probably won't be at launch, right? But we can track, for example, how long someone has been staking over time, right? And there can be a sort of like a hybrid model, right? Where in order to sort of like endorse a proposal and put it up, right, for voting, right, you need to have like this minimum like lifetime staking points, right? And this makes sure that only sort of like members of community can sort of like make proposals if they are, if they have enough sort of like skin in the game, right? That could be one approach. I'm not putting it like okay that's what we're doing, but like that could be a way in which we can like basically if you've got a good proposal, right, either you in order to get it up for voting, either you have to have like enough staking points, or you have to convince someone who has enough staking points to believe that it's a good idea and then put his neck out for you and push that as a proposal. So that could be a nice
huh.
mechanism. Yeah, I think that could be cool.
Wait, so like I think you stated it fine. It's just like I this is the first time I've heard you communicate this. So I actually I have some questions. It's like, so the idea is that so staking points would be earned by the amount of cloud that you stake and the amount that you use it to trade on fund
No,
targeting?
no, 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 no. So staking point is purely a function of trade, like amount times time. So it has nothing to do with like your voting performance or whatever.
Got it.
Like that's like the Futaki thing. That's the ASR. It's a separate thing. But staking points is simply a function of like I've staked 100 cloud for 3 days, therefore I have 300 cloud, staking points or whatever, right? I mean, yeah. And
Right.
so the idea is that you must have enough lifetime staking points, right, in order for you to be able to put a proposal up, right? Because we don't want sort of anyone kind of waltzing in and be like, here's a proposal, right? And then everyone, waste everybody's time, right? So where people, we can think about what bar that should be, right, in terms of like how many staking points you've got to have. Again, devil's in the details, right? But idea is like, okay, you have to have at least 1 million staking points to put a proposal up to be voted on or like to
Yeah.
be discussed on.
Yeah.
That could be an idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And like just to kind of illustrate this for layman's like myself, right? That might be watching the stream. Because this is also my first time listening to this idea. This is not like a planned skit. Like I'm hearing this live, right? Like just to illustrate a point, you might have someone who staked 1,000 cloud for 100 days, and they've accrued 10,000. I hate doing math in public. Um, like 100,000. What? Oh, God damn it! I think it's 100,000. Like 100,000 staking points, right? And you might have someone who like has 50,000 cloud and they've staked it for a day, but it's kind of like it evens out because time is a factor here, right? It's not just about your capital; it's about like how much confidence you've had, or even like how much you want to participate in their governance. Like this is a show of like how much you really care about, um,
Well, I mean,
you know,
how much cloud you've staked over time, right? Basically, and maybe there's
yeah,
some
yeah,
decay function. I mean, but this is like way too complicated. We don't have to.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, I just because like it's very easy to just be like tokens over time, but like I don't know, I'm a very visual person, so it's just my own personal thing. I apologize, I don't even know what to call that. I think
Yeah.
man, it's just okay. Jay has a couple of really good points here. So Jay, he goes like, one thing I think we can do is implement another process, the so-called draft category in the forum. Everyone can submit a proposal in the draft section, including the team. We discuss it, and when it's ready we move to the discussion phase, and that's just maybe some details that can be adjusted, maybe none, right? So it's kind of like in the draft section it could really feel like an incubator, right?
Mm.
um and then like that's where you can have like it's almost like in this incubator phase you don't really feel a type of way about it. You know what I mean? Because it's just ideas. We're just throwing out ideas here. Like we're just putting stuff out there and just seeing what sticks against the wall. And like if you throw out a crazy idea, it doesn't feel like that serious. It's just like whatever, we're talking about it, right? And we're dream big, dream small, tweak here and there, right? Then when you go to discussion, it should really feel like a half-baked cake already, right? You've already kind of decided what your ingredients for this cake is. It's going to be a chocolate cake, it's going to be a fruit cake, it's going to be a strawberry shortcake, whatever. You've already kind of decided that, but you got all the ingredients together. And then like now, after you've put all these ingredients together, do you put it in the oven or not? Is another discussion. And do you bake this cake? So yeah, I kind of like that idea of like you go shopping, and during shopping, it's like you just buy whatever ingredients, and then in the kitchen, you're kind of deciding like, okay, how exactly do these ingredients all fit together? And lastly, you decide like, all right, we putting this bun in the oven or not? So that might be a good mental model. Because right now, what it almost kind of feels like is, hey, so I bought all the ingredients from the store. I don't really care what cake you like, and so you either bake this or not. I mean, I think that's kind of how the process kind of feels right now, and that's not how what was intended, but that's what we're learning, like live as we experiment with this process.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess now we're at a crossroads, right? I mean, let's talk about staking next week, right? When it comes out, and we can think about the meta process then, right? As of right now, I think we want to kind of like make a decision, right? And I think three options, right? Like one is, do we go ahead with proposal two, right, and get it to the vote, right? Number two, or number two, do we sort of like craft a new proposal, right? Like where how do we figure out what to do right now? Because Yeah, I mean, and if we create a new proposal, do we push back the vote? Do we have the same discussion length and push it back to a vote, or we try to keep to the schedule and we shorten the discussion period? So I think these are kind of like the options here.
Yeah. What I can't promise that we can really answer that question literally
Right
right
now,
now. I'm
right,
sure that there
right
are
now,
people
yeah.
I'm like so that's the tension here, right? Like I'm
Mhm.
feeling a little tension. Here's the tension I'm feeling like live right now. Is like people want answers for like what's going to happen, right? And and like from our side it's like we and actually this call for me for me personally was very very valuable because like we got to a place I didn't even and I actually appreciated that we so look there was a disagreement right before this call about if this was like a more like free form discussion or if this was a structured discussion
Sure.
because I come from a more corporate background. The way I do things is always structured. That's just how my brain works. We do step one, step two, step three, step four, right? um what we did instead, and this wasn't because FP forced it on me. I just thought that he made better points. Like, yeah, this should be a more open discussion. I actually like if we did it the structured way that I had envisioned right before this call, we would not have been able to have gotten to this place, right? Like this discussion. And I kind of think that because we had this more open form communication, like I do appreciate kind of where we're at. But what does that mean though? What that ultimately means is that like we have more thinking to do and more talking to do and more division of responsibilities and action items. And again, I made this promise earlier in the call, and I'll make this promise again. I cannot promise that this is going to be linear up always governance proposals like a machine. It's going to be well oiled. It's going to bop, 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 bop. That's not how progress works in any dimension of life ever. Whether it be working out, whether it be forming a new habit, whether it be being good to your wife or your husband or whatever, like everything is a process, and that means governance too. But here's the promise, though. Here's the Sanctum governance process. We will over communicate with you and we will do our best to disseminate the education and the messaging and our thinking through all possible channels. And these this communication will get more complex and wider as we get people who are more involved in the process and helping us echo these messaging and these talking points out, and just like the discussion. So and we can't do it alone. FP and I cannot do this alone. And it's not just FP and I. There's a whole the entire team, is also grinding on governance as well. So it's like we cannot do this alone. Like we truly need people to take what we've talked about here. When you see comments that are just wrong about the point of view, like please help correct. And where you see like a chance to advocate for the Sanctum way of governance, which is like, hey, yes, futarchy, but also, hey, we got to figure out how this actually looks like. That's where we're at right now. Like that we need help communicating this, and not only do we need help communicating it, we need help defining it. So, yeah, I really do appreciate um, that. Max Chaos is showing everyone staking power on forum for people to know who is actually investing in cloud and how much skin they have in the game.
I
Uh,
would love that as a like a little feature. You can hover over the name and you can see like like what like how many cloud do they have staking points. I think okay, so I can we put this can we put how fast comment on, right? It's like how do we decide on the two? What would there be possible to vote on?
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think in the interest of okay, so given that we don't have a process and it's like let's not, so the question is like what do we do, right, in terms of like the meta process, and there I think there would be an infinite regress as to like voting on the voting on the voting on the, I mean, so I'm leaning towards like right now, right, on the meta level, right, like I think the core team is going to, for cloud 2, we're going to discuss it and we're going to make an executive decision. So instead of voting on what to do with cloud 2, because by the time that that vote is concluded, it'll be time for cloud 2 to be voted on anyway, right? I think like in the interest of sort of like moving on and recognizing that we don't have the process out, I think we should just make the decision. Like we meaning core team, like we'll just decide. And it will either decide like let's move forward with Cloud 2 voting, knowing that people, don't want it to pass, and we can show that I think there are pros and cons, right? Like if we do Cloud 2, right, and we go on a vote and it fails, like great, that's like a benefit of Futaki, right? If we take it down, and we do like a new one, great, that's a good one too. Um, um, and it's like, okay, then we're not wasting people's time with like a proposal that's like a little bit muddled and people don't want to vote on. So I think like either is good, but it's like in terms of like which one to do, I think like for right now, I think we decide. Like let's, I know it's not the perfect thing right now, but like let's let the core team decide on this one, like which one to do, and then for future votes, we'll make sure to have like a better process. Yeah, but I'm
Yeah.
doing this not because I have like a strong opinion on this, not because I want to make the decision, but just because I think, in the interest of moving fast and just moving the process along. Yeah, and I think either
Yeah.
approach is not gonna kill us. Like it's fine. Yeah. So that would be my what I would decide. I would be like, okay, let's let the core team decide for this particular cloud two situation. Yeah.
Right. And I again, to repeat for people in the back, this is not about convenience, right? This has nothing to do with like, oh, this is just what's easiest for us, right? It's like there's a real cost to the momentum of Sanctum governance if we have a vote on the vote on the, it's like just this recursive, it's like then you're haggling over the wrong thing, right? It's like you're not even focusing on what matters and what will bring governance forward, right? It's like we need to make executive decisions about what we're doing with Cloud 2 so that we can start to define the meta process. And truly, either outcome is okay. I know there might be some people who are like, oh, it failed. Futarchy doesn't work. It's like, no, actually, Futarchy functions exactly as intended, right? Or we don't put it up because clearly people just are like, oh, why are you putting this up? So like, we will talk about this and and here again, the Sanctum governance process. Either way we choose, we will explain it to you, in very plain language, like why we did it, right? And you may not agree with it, but at least we will over communicate what exactly the thinking was around that. And so you'll never felt left out. You might disagree with us, and I hope it's in good faith, but it certainly won't be like like they just kind of did a thing and they just moved on and they never really talked about it. It's like, no, we will talk about it incessantly.
Yeah, yeah.
um
I think yeah that you put it quite well there. Yeah.
oh, yay, signal. I appreciate that, thank you. um Yes, Giancarlo, hello, ¿cómo está? More experiments is more important this early. I agree. If you're this right now is low stakes. No pun intended. But but it is truly low stakes. Like this isn't like we're some I'm not going to mention some hypothetical proposal, but this is really low stakes here, gentlemen, and ladies and clouds of all ages. Um, Take the cap off, says, Jay secretly. We know it's you, Jay. Yes, he does. FP does have very beautiful hair. Um, we can try that. Ultimately, the market will decide if it passes or not. It is an experiment, and we all have to try all the different possibilities so that it is a successful experiment. I appreciate that point of view. I don't know if we'll go that direction, but I think that's a fair point of view. There are lots of very fair points of view here. So I'm not trying to cut this short, but I truly believe that like we've had like a very substantive discussion
I,
about like
I do want to cut this short because I don't want to hold people hostage for such a long time, right? So
sure, I
I'm
apologize.
very
Yeah,
conscious of people's time.
yeah,
I think we will not do kind of like the Cloud 3. Like I originally wanted to, I had like a proposal, like it was going to be Cloud 3, right? Just like should Sanctum allow sort of permissionless LST creation. So I actually work on these in advance, right? So I actually had like Cloud 3 not ready to go, but like I had already sort of like the proposal up and stuff, but I think let's not do it this session. I think in any case, we had like a great discussion and really, really good comments. So I think the key takeaway is that, like, yeah, we're learning, we're improving the process. But for as to Cloud 2, what are we going to decide? Like, let's, we'll go back, and I will have, I mean, not just, but like the core team will have a think, we'll decide on what to do. Um, whether it's like bring cloud 2 to the vote as per normal, uh bring cloud 3 earlier, right, or bring cloud 3 later and push back the voting. So like all three options are fine with their pros and cons, but like we'll decide. For now we'll make an executive decision, and then for the next one we'll improve the process. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, well, thank you everyone who joined. We're almost at the 2,400 viewers on the stream. This has been the Sanctum Governance Corner. FP, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know that you're cooking on a lot of things, and I do appreciate that you took the time to share your thoughts around governance. I
No,
also
I mean,
appreciate all
not
the
at all.
clouds that
Yes,
joined.
that's who
Yeah,
we really should be appreciating. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the fact that, over 2,000 of you would spend, over an hour of your time, to listen to us, like, I mean, talk about something
Ramble.
that's very deeply meaningful to us. Yeah, no, but it is very deeply
No,
meaningful
you're
to us,
right.
but it
Yeah.
is, yeah, it's deeply meaningful, and like there is passionate debate externally and internally, but really like we're all like going towards the same North Star, which is that we take governance extremely seriously, and we're trying to do it better. Like, let me be very clear. We're trying to do this better than anybody else in the game. All right. Like, we didn't come here to be average. All right. Like, we came here to do, like, excuse my French, but fuck shit up, right, in the best way possible. So, that's the first time I cussed the entire stream. Okay, I've been very conscious to be very careful with my language today, but I just want to, because I'm very passionate about being number one. I don't play games to be number two. I play games to be number one. And this isn't a game. This is real. This is serious. But I do it for real, not for play. So, anyways,
Yeah.
Jeshik, thank you for a fun discussion and getting this. I'm actually going to just stay on for a little bit because I'm just digging the vibe right now. FP, I want to be respectful. Or actually, you know what? I could leave. I don't know. What?
Let's cut.
I just like talking to the clouds.
Yeah.
Okay,
Let's
never
yeah.
mind. Sorry. All right.
Yeah, let's I mean let's call it here. Like this is
Okay.
like the official end of the stream. We can, we can stay here if we want, but yeah, I think let's call it here. So thank you everyone. Yeah, for the
Yeah.
time, put it best. Yeah, thank you all for your time. Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Bye.
Peace. Bye.